Welcome to a very special edition of The Source. We're under attack. Me, my ideas, and my friends are all under attack, but far more importantly, Canada is under attack. Our Canadian values of freedom of speech are under attack. One of the most brutal dictatorships in the world has targeted us. Saudi Arabia, a country so fascist that it's actually named after the Saud family that owns it, has decided that I shouldn't be allowed to say what I say here in Canada. So they've hired one of the world's largest law firms, a 2,600 lawyer monstrosity called Norton Rose, to threaten me into silence and to threaten anyone in Canada who supports what I'm saying. Let me tell you what's happened. It all started when I wrote a book a year ago called Ethical Oil, the case for Canada's oil sands. You've heard me talk about this book on the show a dozen times. It's a pretty simple argument, really. Canada's oil sands are more ethical than the way oil is made in countries like Saudi Arabia. Whether you care about environmental responsibility, peace, the treatment of workers, or just plain human rights, our Canadian oil is ethical oil. It's like the fair trade coffee of the world's oil industry. OPEC oil, on the other hand, especially from Saudi Arabia, is unethical. It's conflict oil, it's Sharia oil, it's blood oil, and we should be doing our best to pump as much of the ethical stuff as we can to replace the bad stuff. Now, when I started here at the Sun News Network in the spring, I handed over the reins of this idea to my friend Alykhan Velshi. You've seen him on the show before. He's a bright young human rights activist who believes in the idea of ethical oil too. So he set up a website called ethicaloil.org with a blog and a PayPal button. It was a grassroots way to keep the idea alive. Now, I'm still a volunteer. I'm the part-time chairman of the thing, which means I get all the fun and he does all the work. But Alykhan produced a short YouTube ad that contrasts the difference between how we treat women here in Canada versus how they treat women in Saudi Arabia. For example, here's the mayor of Fort McMurray. It's the capital of the oil sands, of course. She's a young woman named Melissa Blake. How many young women mayors do you think there are in Saudi Arabia? Exactly, there are none. It's against the Constitution there because their Constitution is the Quran. They follow Sharia law. So here's the YouTube ad that Alykhan put together. Check this out.
Fact. Last year, we bought over 400 million barrels of oil from Saudi Arabia. We bankrolled a state that doesn't allow women to drive, doesn't allow them to leave their homes or work without their male guardian's permission, and a state where a woman's testimony only counts for a half of a man's. Why are we paying their bills and funding their oppression? Today, there's a better way. Ethical oil from Canada's oil sands. Ethical oil, a choice we have to make.
Look, as you can see, it's not really controversial. I mean, everyone knows that women aren't allowed to drive or vote or even go outside without a burqa on in that medieval-style theocracy. Well, Alykhan scraped together some dough to actually put this ad on TV, not just on the internet. And as with all ads like this, it had to be approved by something called the Television Bureau of Canada's Telecaster Services, or Telecaster for short. That's an agency that makes sure TV ads are factually accurate and appropriate for broadcast in Canada. I mean, obviously this ad was approved as accurate. I mean, it's even footnoted, for crying out loud. Now, Alykhan ran the ad for a week on the Oprah Winfrey Network, which is fitting because that's a channel for women, about women. Frankly, it's a liberal channel, which is a perfect fit. But then Alykhan got a tip. The dictatorship of Saudi Arabia paid one of the world's largest law firms to send a threatening letter to Telecaster demanding that our ad have its permission revoked. Telecaster ignored the lawyers. The ad still has their approval, but they were kind enough to tip us off to the legal threat against them and to let us know the name of the lawyer doing the threatening. His name is Rahul Agrawal. And there's a picture of him from his official page at the law firm. Now, ethicaloil.org had our lawyer, Tom Ross, contact Agrawal and ask him what the problem was. We'll have Tom on a bit later in the show, and you can hear from him directly. Now, you might remember Tom as the lawyer who fought for my freedom of speech when the Human Rights Commissions came after me a few years ago. Anyways, Agrawal admitted to Tom that he had, in fact, contacted TV broadcasters around Canada on behalf of the Saudis, threatening them not to air the ad. He admitted it. And then Agrawal actually threatened Ethical Oil, of which I'm the volunteer chairman. Agrawal asked Tom if he'd accept service of a lawsuit against us, against me, seriously. I'm going to show you the exchange of emails the two of them had because I want you to see the exact words he used and how obstinate he was. Here's Agrawal's letter to Tom. They had just had a phone call, and this is him acknowledging that he works for the Saudis and he wants to sue Ethical Oil and me. This is from September 6th. Mr. Ross, we represent the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. We expect to be contacting Ethical Oil on behalf of our client in due course. Kindly advise if you have authority to accept service on behalf of your client. Regards, Rahul P. Agarwal. Now, Tom wrote back right away saying he'd confirm if he could accept the lawsuit, but what exactly is the problem? And so this is what Tom said. He said, Mr. Agarwal, I will confirm instructions in that regard. I asked for a copy of the demand letters we understand your firm has been issuing to various media outlets threatening litigation in respect to advertising associated with the Ethical Oil Institute. Will you or will you not be providing me with a copy of that correspondence? Regards, Tom Ross. No answer. So Tom wrote back again to the Saudi lawyer on September 15th. Mr. Agarwal, I now understand that today a broadcaster broke its advertising contract with the Ethical Oil Institute because of new threats from you or your law firm. If you or your client are going to interfere with the contractual relations of our client by alleging there is a legal dispute between the Ethical Oil Institute and the Saudi government, you have an obligation to inform us of what the alleged legal dispute is. Regards, Tom Ross. Pretty sensible to me. So TV stations were actually canceling contracts with Ethical Oil because of Norton Rose's threats. But Agarwal still wasn't telling us what the problem was. And then this. On September 15th, he writes to Tom Ross again, Mr. Ross, we do not intend to provide you with copies of our correspondence with third parties. As we advised previously, any contact to be made with Ethical Oil directly will be done so in due course. Regards, Rahul Agarwal. You got it? So Rahul Agarwal, a lawyer at one of the largest law firms in the world, has threatened me and the Ethical Oil website with a lawsuit, but he wouldn't tell us what was wrong. But then they were using that pretend legal threat to scare off broadcasters. So they were telling broadcasters they'd better not air the ad or they'd be sued along with me. But they haven't actually sued me yet. It was all a shakedown, a scare tactic to scare broadcasters out of running that ad. Saudi bullying here in Canada. And it worked. Two different networks, including CTV, Canada's #1 private broadcaster, canceled their deal with the Ethical Oil website. CTV is, of course, owned by Bell, which refuses to offer the Sun News Network to subscribers, so they're used to censorship. Hey, granted, it was only for a few thousand bucks worth of ads, but that's not the point. The point is censorship because of legal threats from Saudi Arabia's lawyers. Now, I invited Agarwal on the show to explain himself. Not surprisingly, he has not accepted. That's the Saudi way. I guess they're not much into debating over there. Now, I don't blame Agarwal for having a dictatorship as a client. I mean, even mass murderers like Paul Bernardo have the right to a lawyer, don't they? I mean, it doesn't mean that the lawyer necessarily agrees with the client. I mean, Agarwal actually seems like a nice enough guy. He was a champion debater back in college. Sounds like he'd be a good interview guest. Here's a shot of him at that debate championship having some fun, a little drink, something that's illegal back in Saudi Arabia. Or here's him having some fun with a woman who was not in a burqa. That's also illegal in Saudi Arabia. So Agarwal looks like a fun guy who just happens to have a misogynistic medieval dictator for a client. I bet they pay pretty well. I mean, Agarwal is a Norton Rose kind of guy. The firm has a progressive diversity policy and is very concerned about human rights, so they say. They have a lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender network at the firm. They have many feminist initiatives and had a big celebration for International Women's Day. In other words, they really want you to think they're liberal and progressive and care about human rights. That's what they say publicly. But privately, they take money from Saudi tyrants to chill Canadian broadcasters into silence. I guess my question for good guys like Agarwal is, how long can you call yourself a feminist firm when you take money from people who beat women for the crime of being raped? How long can you call yourself a lesbian and gay-friendly law firm while helping a regime where homosexuality is a crime? Isn't it weird to party with booze and girls while taking cash from people who live in a medieval theocracy where those things are banned? I asked Agarwal questions like this by email. I invited him on the show. But you know, he's not so much into debating anymore these days. I also asked the Saudi ambassador to come on the show to debate this. Of course, he didn't accept either. Frankly, I don't know if a Saudi ambassador would ever debate a Jew. Look, Saudi Arabia is an enemy of Canada. They're an enemy of the West. They are an enemy of freedom. Remember, 15 out of the 19 hijackers on 9/11 came from Saudi Arabia. Osama bin Laden was from a prominent Saudi family. Saudi Arabia continues to finance terrorism around the world to this day. Now, normally Saudi Arabia likes to bully people in the dark. They don't have a free press over there. They don't like groups like Amnesty International seeing what they're up to. They like the shadows. They're trying to keep their bullying of Canadian media companies secret too. They won't release the threatening letters they admit that they have sent. But why would the Saudis risk public embarrassment by fighting with me and with a little web-based group like ethicaloil.org? I think the answer comes from a Saudi billionaire. Here's Prince Walid bin Talal telling CNN his thoughts on the oil sands. Listen to this.
We want the price to be between 70 and 80, not only to help the West, but also to help ourselves. We don't want the West to go and find alternatives, because clearly the higher price oil goes, the more you have incentive to go and find alternatives.
Did you catch that? The Saudi prince didn't use the word oil sands. He said alternatives. That's what the oil sands are, an alternative source, an unconventional source, 173 billion barrels that could actually replace all of Saudi Arabia's imports to the United States. The Saudis don't want that to happen. That's why they don't want the price of oil to get too high, because people might invest in the oil sands. So like Greenpeace, the Saudis hate our oil sands. But the Saudis are usually content to let Greenpeace do the heavy lifting. But this time the Saudis were caught red-handed because we got the tip from Telecaster. The Saudis are now threatening me and ethicaloil.org with a lawsuit. Look, let's be honest, that's not important. They're threatening Canadian media companies with lawsuits, and those companies are caving. That is important. CTV caving is important. It's destroying our culture of freedom and replacing it with a Saudi culture of tyranny and bullying and censorship. They're attacking us because we shone a light of scrutiny on their treatment of women and minorities. They want to roll back our culture of equality of the sexes too. They want that whole discussion to be off limits. They want to drive that discussion off our TV screens here in Canada, not just over in Saudi Arabia. And look at why. Look at what Prince Walid bin Talal said. They don't like oil alternatives. They don't like Canadian oil sands oil. They don't like ethical oil. They don't want their dominance to be ended. They love money. They hate women. They hate gays. They hate freedom. But good Lord, they love their money. Well, I'm pleased to say that the Sun News Network is running those ethical oil ads. Just a few $1,000 worth. I mean, ethicaloil.org is not filthy rich like the Saudis. It should be no big deal that the Sun's running these ads. I mean, it's normal to run ads in a democracy on a TV station. It's not remarkable. That's actually what the Sun does for a living. What's remarkable is that other broadcasters like CTV refuse to do so out of fear of the Saudis. Like, I do not care what you think about me. I don't care. I don't even care what you think of the oil sands. Whatever your political stripe, left wing or right wing, you must agree that Canadians should be free to express ourselves without foreign embassies bullying us and bullying Canadian TV stations. And those TV stations should stand up to these bullies. And John Baird, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, must call in the Saudi ambassador and tell him that he is not welcome to bring in his Sharia censorship here, even if there are lawyers willing to do their dirty work for them. Welcome back to our show. It's always about freedom every day. Today, the freedom may well be my own that I'm fighting to protect. Joining me now live from our Calgary studios is Tom Ross. Tom was my lawyer, some of you may know, when I was prosecuted by the Alberta Human Rights Commission for daring to publish those Danish cartoons of Mohammed. And he's helping me again today defend me and the ethicaloil.org website against the Saudi menace. Tom, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Ezra.
Tom, just to set the mood, just to get things right, I'd like to play that 30-second ad, and then I'd like you to talk about your experience in dealing with the Saudi law firms. For just 30 seconds to take a look at that gorgeous, gorgeous piece of filmography again.
Sure.
Fact. Last year, we bought over 400 million barrels of oil from Saudi Arabia. We bankrolled a state that doesn't allow women to drive, doesn't allow them to leave their homes or work without their male guardian's permission, and a state where a woman's testimony only counts for a half of a man's. Why are we paying their bills and funding their oppression? Today, there's a better way. Ethical oil from Canada's oil sands. Ethical oil, a choice we have to make.
Tommy, I don't know about you, but I smell an Oscar there. Just gorgeous. Now, we heard a tip from Telecaster that approves ads that the Saudis don't share my aesthetic taste. They don't like the ad. You got on the phone to Rahul Agarwal, a lawyer for the Saudis who works for the monster firm Norton Rose. Tell me what that phone call was like. Just, you know, I release you from any solicitor-client privilege. Tell the world, Tom, what was it like when you dialed up this Saudi lawyer?
Certainly. It was September 6th, and we had, as you identified, had some information that they had been threatening certain broadcasters if they continued to run the ads. So I contacted him, identified myself as representing Ethical Oil, and asked him if we could obtain a copy of these threatening letters. He appeared to be surprised that I had his contact information, didn't really disclose anything, certainly didn't deny that the threatening letters had been issued, and indicated that he would get back to me. Sometime later that day he did, simply indicating that they were acting in this matter, and he understood that I was acting for Ethical Oil, and that they were not going to share any letters between them and third parties.
Now,
so that was the first step.
Now, I read earlier some of the exchange of email between you and him. I mean, you didn't give up, though. You probably sent him over the course of the next week, what, 2, 3, 4 more letters? How many times did you try and find out what exactly his beef was with these ads? I mean, I know he didn't like it because he represents the Saudis and they don't like criticism. They don't allow it in their own country. Did he ever indicate to you what might be legally wrong or what his legal complaint was against these, this beautiful ad?
No, he didn't. And of course, that's the difficult thing, Ezra, is it's tough to fight in a vacuum. And the information has never been described to me or to Ethical Oil as to what specifically the concerns are. And we have asked for that at least 3 or 4 times by me. Starting on the same day, on the 6th of September, I emailed back indicating, bear in mind that he had asked us the aggressive question of whether we were prepared to accept service on behalf of Ethical Oil.
That means, now service, just for folks, I mean, I'm a lawyer, I know what that means. That means when you sue somebody, you can't just send it in a letter in the post box. You've got to tag them with the lawsuit or give it to a lawyer who will officially say, yeah, we got it. So service, when you say, will you accept service of a document, Tom, that's basically saying we're going to sue you, right?
That's what it would indicate, exactly.
Now,
so
go ahead.
On that day, we wrote back and said, we'll need to get instructions on that, but in the meantime, would you please send us the letters that we understand have been issued? And again, the response was, no, we're not prepared to do that. So a few days passed and we considered the next steps. And early last week, I again requested the information that I had before because he indicated he would get back to me on that as well. And I further indicated that, yes, we could accept service of any legal claims or proceedings, but it would be helpful, and we asked, would they please essentially give us the courtesy of identifying what it is that they think is legally inappropriate about the ads.
Now, I mean, it's pretty obvious to me, I mean, you're giving a really straight legal answer. I'm more a political guy, Tommy, and I just see it's BS. They really didn't have a legal case. Can you answer me this? I mean, obviously, it's in accordance with broadcasting law. It was approved by Telecaster. It remains approved to this day. Talk about defamation law. I mean, we didn't name any person in there. We talk about the Saudi government. We have a picture of their currency with the Saudi king. In defamation law, can a country sue you for bad-mouthing it? Like if I say, oh, those Americans, I hope we crush them in sports. Like the country of the United States cannot sue in court in Canada for defamation, can it?
No. This really is something that has changed over the years with the advent of the Charter, but prior to the Charter, yes, it was possible for governments, at least local governments, to sue for defamation. For the last 30 years, to the extent this has been addressed in courts, our courts have said, look, we live in a country with free expression. It would be anathema to that, it would be contrary to that to have governments capable of punishing critics by suing them. And it would result really in a situation where only the well-heeled, the very rich, could afford to take a chance of criticizing government. That obviously is contrary to our democratic principles. And although those cases have been local, there's no reason whatsoever to expect that a foreign government would be allowed to sue for defamation when a local government can't.
Well, and of course, there's always the defense of truth. I mean, we all know women can't drive in Saudi Arabia and the Sharia is the law. But we only have about a minute left, Tom, but let me ask you this. I mean, the threats to me, they make me laugh because it's just a bunch of Saudi sheiks shouting into the wind. But when a lawyer in Toronto for Norton Rose big fancy law firm, threatens CTV, and CTV says, yikes. I mean, really, I don't think CTV is pro-Sharia law. They just look at Norton Rose, the big bully law firm, and they say, you know what, we don't want to spend $250,000 defending running an ad that we're only going to make $2,000 about. What about the inducing CTV to breach the contract? What about the fact that other companies in Canada are collapsing in the face of this Saudi bullying and are actually complying with this fatwa?
Well, that's the frustrating part of it, of course, and that's one of the reasons we had written later last week indicating we had understood that these threats had been made to third parties. We clearly have seen that they've had some success, and part of the threat was that there was some alleged legal dispute between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Ethical Oil. And if those allegations are being made, clearly there's an obligation for them to identify what this alleged legal dispute is, and please let us know. Without having that information, of course, you're fighting in the dark.
Last question, Tom. You defended me a few years ago when the Alberta Human Rights Commission prosecuted a fatwa against me by some radical imam. You stood firm there. I called that lawfare, a slap suit, strategic litigation against public participation, that this radical imam was just trying to beat me up using the law. Is this, in your opinion, as a lawyer and as someone who understands the law, is this another case of lawfare financed by the Saudis?
It's tough, Ezra, to really comment on that without knowing exactly what the allegations are, but it certainly has that appearance at the moment.
Tom Ross, partner McLennan Ross, my personal legal bodyguard who has so far kept me out of jail. I thank you very much for appearing on The Source today.
Thanks very much, Ezra.
Hello and welcome, and to our friends from the Saudi embassy, assalamu alaikum. I don't really know what that means, but it's Arabic. Hey, folks, joining me in studio today is Alykhan Velshi, who's the community organizer and human rights activist behind ethicaloil.org. Hey, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I see you're out of jail. Not that you were in jail. You stayed out of jail. They haven't been able to slap you with a fatwa. Me neither. This may be our last moment of freedom.
It may be before they truly manage to export their Sharia law here into Canada, which is what they want.
You know, I got to say, if you're going to be attacked by lawyers versus terrorist bombs, I'd prefer the lawyers, because at least lawyers have a bit of a code of conduct. It sounds like the beginning of a lawyer joke. What's the difference between a jihadi lawyer and a jihadi with a bomb? I'm not making a joke. I mean, frankly, of all the ways Saudi Arabia deals with its critics, especially, God forbid, its critics in its own country, being threatened with a lawsuit by Norton Rose is one of the least terrifying.
Absolutely. You know, look, lawfare, undermines our right to freedom of speech, but it's not being beheaded. So I guess in the grand sort of pendulum of sins and wrongs, it's probably one of the least bad.
Let's do our best to not lose our heads here.
Yes.
Now, you've been on the show about a half dozen times. You're one of my favorite guests, of course. I mean, I love the story of ethical oil. I wrote a book on it, and you've taken the idea of run with it on the blog. Let's do a quick recap of some of the things that led up to this, because I think the Saudis sort of picked us up on their radar screen a few months ago, but it wasn't until this ad that they fired back. Let's start, for example, with some contrast ads showing what life is like here versus life in Saudi Arabia. Here's the first one. That woman on the right is Mayor Melissa Blake, the mayor of Fort McMurray. On the left is an Amnesty International photo of a woman about to be stoned. And, let's just run through some of these, and maybe you can give a quick commentary. What's that?
That's a photo of two gay young men being hung in Iran because being a homosexual is a crime in Iran. And the other is a photo from Toronto Gay Pride showing that in Canada we respect the rights of gays and lesbians.
Let's just flip through the rest. That's Sudan on the left, Darfur, and an Aboriginal person in the oil sands. We got a couple more of these. These are great contrasts. What's that on the left?
That's just an individual, in the Middle East, in his oil field. And on the right we have the peacekeeping monument here in Ottawa.
And I think we might have one more. Yeah, well, there you go.
That's Hugo Chavez, the president of Venezuela, a country which the United Nations says uses forced labor. And on the other hand, you have, a Canadian worker who's happy that he's probably got a good job here in the oil patch.
Last slide.
And there you have a scene from the Niger Delta, where obviously they don't respect the environment. And on the right, you have a scene from from an open pit that's been reclaimed in the oil sands. It's now forced.
I love these ads. They're just so crystal clear. It's like a bumper sticker. It sums it up. And these ads, I saw them in the Globe and Mail. They're not quite ads. They're sort of displays. I saw them in the Globe and Mail. I saw them in the Calgary Herald. Now, then you kick things up a notch by actually having an event outside the Lush soap store in Ottawa. Now, we've got a quick photo of that. Yeah. Who is that beautiful Saudi, well, I guess I'm joking around, she's not a Saudi. Who is that lady and what's she doing?
She's a performance actress who was outraged when she found out that the cosmetics company Lush criticizes and attacks Canada's oil sands but does business in Saudi Arabia. She thought it was a bit of ethical hypocrisy. And so she offered to organize a bit of a protest, some street theater outside of Lush's Ottawa store. And so there she is, standing outside Lush's store, dressed in the full-on burqa, as they do in Saudi Arabia, where Lush has stores, reminding passers-by that here you have in Lush a company that attacks Canada and attacks Canada's oil sands, but does business in Saudi Arabia and is silent on the treatment of women in Saudi Arabia.
We got one more slide. It's down in Washington, D.C. just a couple weeks ago with the big pipeline project. Now, who are those? A couple of beautiful girls there. Stop Canada, Americans for OPEC.com. Tell me a bit about this.
Well, this is outside the White House, where environmentalists and activists have been gathering every day to protest a pipeline that would ship oil sands bitumen down into the United States. And so these protesters, for some reason, oppose that. And so what we did is we had two women dress up in burqas and kind of parody the protest of the environmentalists. So they were basically saying that they are Americans for OPEC, because that by opposing Canada's oil sands, all you're doing is that you're keeping the special relationship that America has with OPEC and its dependence on OPEC.
You know what I love about all these things? They're what I call asymmetrical. I mean, $50 for the burqa, $1 for the sign. You've got yourself a protest. I mean, it's all so low budget compared to the multi-millions that the Greenpeace has or the billions that the Sharia states have. Now, that's all prelude, because over the last week, as we just heard from Tom Ross, you and I, and ethicaloil.org, and anyone who dares to put this on TV, like CTV, has been slapped with a threat. What do you make of this? What do you make of this?
Well, you know, it's an outrage. It's a scandal that a foreign dictatorship would actually try to export its contempt for freedom of the press and freedom of the speech into Canada. It's bad enough when they suppress their own citizens' rights, but when they then try to control and censor what can appear on a Canadian television screen, that goes way too far, and that's why I've called for a formal investigation into this domestic political interference into Canada by a Saudi dictatorship.
Now, we're out of time, but I want to stretch our interview by an extra minute because I want to go a little deeper here. Tell me what you've done. Tell me how you've lodged a protest. Tell me what you've said to the Saudi embassy. I invited the Saudi ambassador on. Of course, he's not going to come. What have you said and done? And what have you said and done? I mean, you used to work on Parliament Hill, so you know all those guys. You used to work for Jason Kenney. You know those guys, you know they don't like censorship, you know they don't like dictatorships. What have you communicated to the government, and what do you hope they'll do in the face of you revealing this subterranean censorship?
Well, you know, the first thing that we've done is we've formally notified the Minister of Foreign Affairs as well as the Chairman of the House of Commons Committee on Foreign Affairs. And
did you let them know that CTV and another network have broken their contract and they refused to air this?
No, we've just limited it to the fact that the Saudi Arabian government is trying to take an ad off of Canadian television screens and trying to censor Canadian television, and calling for them to investigate this, because this is a very serious matter. You know, we've had other issues in the news recently about foreign interference in Canadian affairs, and this is something that they need to take very seriously. The second thing we've done is we've actually just put the ad back on the air. Obviously, the Saudi princes in Riyadh saw the ad on the Oprah Winfrey Network. Maybe that's what they do during their
They want to put
daytime,
Oprah in a burqa,
right?
Hey, that's
well,
what I hear.
Now they're going to see it on this network, on Sun News Network, because we've put the ads back on the Sun News Network. And the third thing that I've done is I've challenged the Saudi ambassador to a debate, because in Canada, that's how we settle disagreements, through open debate and dialogue, not through intimidation and bullying.
I get the feeling they're not going to engage you in a debate, but maybe you could make it more attractive by having a woman host the debate who's not in a burqa. I hear those Saudi men would go wild.
Yeah, you know, in fact, I think that would be a great way of driving home the point that in Saudi Arabia they oppress women, whereas in Canada we empower them.
Yeah, you know, it's just so infuriating that the liberal values of Canada, equality of men and women, nonviolent solutions to problems, we talk things out, we don't threaten people. All those things are being attacked here. I'm glad you're on our side, Alykhan.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Welcome back. There's two ways to wage a jihad. One is with bombs and guns. The other, probably smarter way, is through lawyers. I'm talking about lawfare. And joining me now live from New York City is Brooke Goldstein, the director of the Lawfare Project. Brooke, thanks for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Now, you saw the basic facts of our situation, a pro-oil sands oil ad criticizing the Saudi ethics has been bullied off the air in Canada, at least on one network, CTV. They've threatened others. They've even threatened me and our little ethical oil website. Is this a dictionary definition of lawfare?
It is. I think it is a perfect example of the manipulation of a legal system or legal processes, which is what the cease and desist letter is, to silence and to punish free speech about Islamism, about terror financing, and obviously about issues of national concern. And this is exactly what this is, an issue of national concern. Canadians have a right to know where their money is going and what the ethical alternatives are. And this is also an attack directly on Alberta oil workers, on the field workers there, because the ad is supporting their work.
Now, what's funny about this, I mean, I've been the victim of lawfare before when the Danish cartoons of Mohammed, a radical Muslim preacher, went after me, but at least he was doing so openly. Brooke, what's fascinating about this case is that the Saudi lawyers at Norton Rose, they confess that they're sending these threatening letters out, but they will not show us the letters. They say that's none of your business, but they continue to terrify broadcasters. Is this the first time you've seen lawfare being admitted to, but the actually threatening letters being kept secret?
Look, I think the irony abounds. I'm not quite sure, but according to your attorney, I saw a couple emails go back and forth. You actually have a right under Canadian law to view this letter. But think about it from this perspective. The Saudis are members, current members of the Human Rights Council. They're signatories to the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, but they're blatantly going around violating international law and trying to shut people up who are talking about it. And think of the slippery slope that this is going to create if indeed they are successful and people like CTV, as I understand it, are now capitulating. And this is an absolutely frivolous claim. We have journalists writing about issues like this every day. Are they now going to be silenced? We have a UN representative, her name is Catherine Ashton, that recently, this past July, wrote a letter to women in Saudi Arabia supporting their right to drive. Is she now going to be silenced? It's absolutely outrageous.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, the actual facts of the ad are rock solid. The ad, if you've seen it, actually footnotes where the information comes from. Let me get to an area of your expertise. You've been working on this lawfare file in New York for years. What is the solution, Brooke? I mean, I've been complaining and we've been telling this story because it's important to know what the facts are. But now that we know what the facts are, now we know what the Saudis are up to, we see the bullying, we have proof of it. What do we do about it, Brooke?
Well, there's 2 points there that I want to touch on. Number one, you are absolutely correct. Every single thing that is mentioned in this ad is true. And I'm going to go one step further. Saudi Arabia violates the rights of homosexuals. In 2005, over 92 men were arrested for the crime of homosexuality. They routinely violate the rights of children. They teach children in their schools that Christians and Jews and infidels are the enemy of Islam and they must be killed and destroyed. And they are a state sponsor of terrorism. They are guilty of aiding and abetting the premeditated murder of innocent civilians around the world. What is the solution? The solution is not to capitulate. I commend your bravery and the bravery of the producers at Sun TV who are continuing to air this ad. And I encourage the people who are watching this program to post the ad on Facebook, post it on Twitter. Let's get it viral. Let's spread it out there and show the Saudis that we are not intimidated by these types of empty legal threats.
That's a good court of public opinion response, like a public political response. But what should the Canadian government do, if anything? I think at the very least, our government should condemn this and maybe summon the Saudi ambassador and give him a talking to, preferably by a woman bureaucrat. What do you think the government of Canada should do, Brooke?
100% the government should condemn this activity, and there should also be an investigation into the ethical obligations of a law firm like Norton Rose that is threatening Canadian citizens, threatening to violate their free speech rights. As I understand it, there are contractual obligations right now that are also being violated. I think that we have to go on the offense. I think that attorneys for your side, for example, should be investigating their practices.
Brooke Goldstein, the Lawfare Project, we've got to leave it there. Thank you for joining us from New York. You've got a lot of experience in lawfare, and unfortunately, I'm getting some experience in the matter, too. It will not surprise you to learn that this kind of Saudi attack on free speech is not limited to Canada. In fact, we're just the latest victims. Joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Dr. Daniel Pipes. He is the president of the Middle East Forum. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Ezra.
Now, you've heard the background, you've seen the background here. Basically, the Saudi government threatening Canadian broadcasters if they dare show an ad critical of their OPEC oil. Put this in a grander perspective for us. We've been looking at the small picture. Tell us about the forest, not just the trees, Doctor.
A couple of points, Ezra. First is, I think the really delicate issue here is not oil, but rather women and the treatment of women and Islam and so forth. So that's the issue. Whether you want to have oil coming from here or there, they will let you talk about that. They won't stop that. But Islam, women, Saudi Arabia, that's the problem. Second point is that this fits into a larger context. In the Islamic world, there is not freedom of speech, and they don't want freedom of speech about the things they don't talk about, namely Islam, women, and the like. There are two ways of dealing with this. The one, which is better known, is the Iranian way, which was epitomized by a 1989 edict by Ayatollah Khomeini, then the head of government of Iran, the ruler of Iran, and Salman Rushdie. He set out an edict putting Rushdie to death for the novel he wrote. That's one way of doing it, and that's had enormous impact. But the second way of doing it is the Saudi way, which is to go to law firms. And here the first and best example I know of was a film that was produced in London in 1980 called Death of a Princess, roughly on the same topics that your ad deals with, namely women in Saudi Arabia. And the Saudis were very unhappy with this and brought out lawsuits and brought out pressure and threatened to cut contracts and so forth in order to get this film stopped. Well, they didn't do it, but it's still very hard to see. You look on YouTube and it's hardly there because the Saudis don't want it to be seen. So Saudi Arabia has a long record going back decades of trying to stop anything that is particularly inimical to the question of Islam and particularly women.
Now, what's fascinating, when I interviewed our lawyer, Tom Ross, he said that when he called the Saudis' lawyer, he sensed surprise that the Saudis' lawyer was found out. He had been trying to do this under the radar. Is that really the solution in a free country like Canada or the United States and the UK, is to shine a light of scrutiny on this Saudi legal lawfare? What's the best remedy against it? Is it just to expose it?
I think that's a very good start, yes. And to get people alarmed by it, to have laws put in place against this kind of...
Now, what do you mean by laws put in place against it? What kind of law could stop legal threats that wouldn't also violate our own freedom of speech, Doctor?
Well, this is not my area of specialty, but I think one could have laws in Canada or elsewhere that establish that foreign states are not in a position to impede freedom of speech in our countries, that they don't have legal standing to do that. It doesn't seem right that the enormous resources of a state, particularly the Saudi state, can be brought to bear on individuals like yourself, small organizations, media institutions. It doesn't seem right.
Now, tell me again, pull the camera back, let's talk about the world. You follow the Organization of the Islamic Conference, the largest bloc of states at the United Nations, led by the Saudis. It's an Islamic group. Are the Saudis using the United Nations and other forms of global governance to achieve the same thing? Is this part of a global strategy of silencing critics?
Yeah, but there are two different topics here. One is Islam in Saudi Arabia, which is what Death of a Princess and your ad are about. The second is the larger topic of Islam everywhere, in Muhammad and the Quran and so forth. And on that topic, what the Saudis are trying to do is put in place at the United Nations, via the Organization of the Islamic Conference, which they founded some 40 years ago, a general rule that says that one shouldn't be disrespectful of religions. Now, this is religion in general, not Islam in particular, but of course, the purpose, the Saudi purpose, is to keep free discussion of Islam under wraps. And that has made some progress in the United Nations. It is a scary precedent. I don't think it's going to have real impact in our countries, but UN regulations are important around the world, and they set a kind of moral tone. And it is a dangerous path we're going down. And I'm sad to say that the U.S. government has been colluding with this, has not been determinedly against it. Although we have complete freedom in this country, we're perfectly okay with, it seems, the United Nations passing resolutions that condemn this kind of freedom of speech around the world.
Dr. Pipes, I regret we're out of time. I very much appreciated your remarks. And maybe in closing, I can ask you for your help to help spread the word about this bullying going on in your friendly neighbors to the north by the Saudis. So please give us a hand.